So I think I'm ready to do sort of part two now of this. Everything has changed and nothing has changed, because I think sort of listening back over the last talk, which can be painfully embarrassing at times, I should say. Um, I didn't really get to the nub really of what I'm thinking about here, and that is this um, not quite terror, but a sort of certain amount of disquiet about the idea that we're born into these narratives. This, the pork luncheon meat and the red pillar boxes, and there's something sort of inescapable about the enculturation and you might say indoctrination if you were feeling grumpy, perhaps, and that that in some way limits our imagination. And in some sense, this is shown when we encounter kind of foreign cultures and see how radically differently things can be done and how differently lives can be lived. So to some extent, that sort of jars and says, hey, there's a bigger me than just this particular sort of social national profile. There's a me that sort of transcends this enculturation. Okay. That might be so, but is the training? Does the training extend so deep in our developing sort of years and sort of childhoods and adolescences and so on? Does it just, are we trained to such an extent that it's inescapable? I mean, certainly when you see some of the sort of populist narrative that's emerged in the last few years with the sort of rise of the far right and Trump and the rise of the resurgence of far right thinking in Europe and so on and so forth. You just think, well, have we made any progress? And these people must be trapped inside narratives to be able to literally point the finger and say we are better than them. We know it. We're the best, right? And that gives us a certain amount of entitlement over these lesser beings, and this kind of thinking still prevails. And again, so perhaps supporting the notion that nothing has changed. Look what's going on in Ukraine. I mean, I really was lulled into believing that we'd kind of moved past that stuff. We'd had these horrible wars, and we'd carved out some agreements. The superpowers. We'd had the Cold War. We'd got past the Cuban Missile Crisis. We've avoided all of that, and we're moving towards a brighter future here. We're more we're thinking more holistically, more inclusively. Those boundaries are becoming fuzzier, and I think cosmopolitanism kind of if it's not necessarily the right way forward, it's inevitable. So we've sort of got to work with it as opposed to this sort of reactionary stance that the old world seems to be putting up. In some sense, that's what Putin seems to sort of represent. He seems to be a symbol of the sort of old world mentality. I mean, there's some loads of musings around this, and frankly, I don't think we should have been as embedded in the Ukraine as we were, and there was an agreement struck at the end of with the big boys saying, look, you don't go into Ukraine, and just don't fuck around with Russia. I mean, it's crazy, and they fucked around with Russia, and this is what's happened. But I mean, that's not to say that the acts of Russia and Putin and boys are forgivable, because they're absolutely completely unforgivable. Actions of violence against people, again, like I said, I thought we were past this, but we're clearly not. So, so these sorts of behaviours, people marching to the tune of these sorts of narratives, people believing in it, and people believing in expansionism and authoritarianism again, and these things seem to sort of come around with kind of economic depressions. And well, hang on, who causes the economic depression? Well, I think we know the answer to this, don't we? There's certain sort of financial elites that reign supreme, like kind of overlords or sort of aristocrats, really, or sort of modern royalty. I mean, it's just kind of capital royalty, essentially. I mean, if you look at the American sort of political taxonomy, you'll see a similar kind of nepotistic feudalistic sort of structuring, power structuring. And the names that just keep coming back and again, and families that are essentially the kind of royalty, really. So again, nothing's changed. We've got people who are kind of kept in this just slightly below homeostatic sort of financial enslavement. They can't quite just turn that corner. They're little, they're just, and of course there'll be many among us who sort of prosper and work the system perfectly well, and I'm not taking anything away from any of those efforts at all. And many of the jobs that are and functions that are performed in society are absolutely critical. And it all sort of hangs together and internally sort of mutual kind of symbiotic sort of relationships and so on. So you can't really point. Again, it's the finger pointing thing, isn't it? You point to a bit of it, but there are some decaying, cancerous areas of society that just seem to destroy wealth. If all that money has been generated by sort of hard labour and work and so on and so forth, it ends up going into a kind of weird sort of fiscal space of financial instruments and longs and swaps and shorts, where money seems to be just generated out of thin air and lost just as easily down sort of investment black holes, and it just seems to be utterly useless. When you compare it with, say, nursing or teaching or building houses or plumbing or cleaning, right? And so you just got all these kind of geezers wandering around in pinstripes, just seem soaking all the money up somehow, and they soak it into these vast financial sort of institutions, banks, accountancy, professional services firms, and they just seem to chew up a load of and produce a load more suits and boots and laptops and digits on screens and all this kind of stuff. And it's absolutely completely inaccessible if to a tribesman living in Somalia. They might have mobile phones, I suppose, these days, probably buying Bitcoin perhaps, but it's just, again, it's just people lording up their kind of game theoretic accumulation of power, which seems to be the case. You have conversations with economists, they say, yeah, it's all just preordained. It's game theory. The wealth always ends up in the hands of a very small concentration, sort of 1%ers, and the majority of us tend to live in poverty because of this. And you say, well, that can't be science, because on the other hand, we've got this justice system which implies and necessitates the idea of free will. So on the one hand, we're saying we're subject to these kind of economic sort of procedures almost that are sort of inexorably drawn towards this unbalanced, disharmonious, kind of cancerous pain in the arse, frankly. And I don't know. History seems to support that view. And even where we've had kind of progressivists sort of rebel and rise up and stuff. I know we've seen change, and there's been tons of sacrifice and effort against the beast, if you like. But whoever this beast is it a beast within? Are we just doomed to live out these sort of agitated, sort of combative lives? Is it necessary? In fact, does it sort of sharpen our tool? Here's the whole sort of struggle for survival, fitness, and the post or sort of neo-Darwinistic view of things. Whereas we're described as these violent apes, right? And then we point the finger at chimpanzees and say, look, we're 99% the same as them, which means far less to me than it does to most of us. People say, oh, we're 99%, so they're 99% of our DNA, so they're just like us. Well, yeah, sure, they're similar, but that 1%, and also we know that DNA only carries the instructions to print proteins. It doesn't do anything but that, so it just gives us the Lego bricks, but something else does the rest. And obviously there's Levin's bioelectric fields, there's Sheldrake's polymorphic resonance, there's the kind of fractal mycelial sort of theories of teleology and so on, and all good fun stuff. But it doesn't seem to sort of change the fact that we spend a lot of our times kind of wrestling with our neighbours, and in this rat race thing. and it's really kind of quite disappointing because because we could, and maybe here's where AI comes in, because because AI is coming in with an unemotional, unless we give it one, but it comes in with a sort of an objective viewpoint. It'll probably just say, well, look, let's just take a survey of the current world's resources, right? So everything we've got, the sort of global assets, right, and real assets, not financial assets. I mean wood, right? I mean food. I mean cotton. I mean tobacco. I mean all of the stuff, right? And so let's just take stock, do an inventory check. What have we got, right? And then on the other hand, we do a kind of requirements list and say, well, what do we need, right? And that's quite a simple model. It's like, well, how many people have we got? And we work out a basic unit, right, of space, medicine, electricity, and so on and so forth that's required for a modern human to function, right? We do the math in terms of power distribution, asset, resource distribution to the places where it's actually needed, and as opposed to the places where people think they're going to make more money out of it, out of thin air. It's fascinating that I think there was this anthropologist went to a South America, previously uncontacted South American village. I mean, this is an old story. It's I can't remember the freaking name of the guy. It'll come to me, but I think it's back in the 80s, and there was a documentary about it. And these guys had never seen a white man. They'd never seen a car. Although interestingly, they had seen these metal birds flying over, so they had wondered about those, and I think they were woven into some of their folklore and so on. But there was some guy who could do so. They sent people out into the outer world, right? I mean, poetically, it might have been because they'd seen these metal birds. I seem to remember all these aircraft, and so these people went out and made contact with those and learnt our language and so on, and then became interpreters. And so this Western sort of anthropologist and journalist went out there, and these tribesmen just couldn't understand what we meant by profit, right? So they said, well, we can't get more than there is in the ground, so what comes out of the ground is what comes out of the ground, and that gets distributed. And not according to some socialist or communist or theoretical model, but just according to need, right? Because they live as a sort of kind of interconnected, sort of interdependent tribe, where the actions of everybody are significant to everybody else. Right? And so, but these guys spent most of their time lying around, chilling out, partying, doing art and dance and telling stories. The majority of their day, they would spend. I mean, okay, the weather's a little bit better in these places. They're probably less dependent on central heating, granted. But they don't sit around debating the value of things and investing and trying to profit from each other's losses. Because I mean, ultimately, one man's profit is another man's loss, isn't it? Because how is profit made? Let's not get too heavily into this, but think about the idea of a factory. And there are probably millions of examples of this, but you've got 100 villagers working in this factory. In fact, this village depends on the factory, right? The factory owner decides he can get some machines to replace all the villagers' labour in the factory. So he replaces them with the machines. Now nobody in that village has a job, but there's one guy who owns everything, doesn't do anything because the whole thing is automated, and he's still reaping the rewards. And you can just look at that and say, well, that's A, it's immoral. B, it's actually not efficient, really. It's not economical. If the question is, can we improve conditions on planet Earth for human beings? It's utterly an uneconomical model. And it probably won't even make that guy happy anyway. He'll end up being lonely and hated. Probably even his family will be able to see the unethic involved in what's going on here. So, so back to the original idea. Is it possible to free ourselves from these models of thought? Is it possible to just say, look, I'm not English. I'm not even European, right? I'm just an upright ape on this planet trying to get by like everybody else. There's a universal desire in all of our hearts and bodies and minds to perpetuate our own survival and that of our clan. And then therein lies the question of who is our clan. We actually, at my social group when we were younger, we called our group the clan, and there was this deep sense of kind of membership and loyalty and dedication and foolhardy, silliness and we hung around for ages, and there's a bunch of us are still about and are still. We don't do silly handshakes and refer to each other as Klansmen anymore, but it's those bonds will never be broken, and so it's possible to form new narratives within this setting. I know that much, but then the narrative therein is just based upon the models that we were raised to operate within. So I just wonder what this does to me is just get my mind just all over the place, thinking about the possibility of unlearning some of our existing models, right? And what could be achieved if we were completely unshackled and we were allowed to use our imagination. And I think that it could be freaking amazing. Like I say, I'm still the space cadet, kind of wide-eyed hippie, really, that I kind of always have been. But I believe that there is a way of getting there, and it certainly won't be in our lifetime. But we have to do something, surely, to enhance our prospects. I mean, and this I haven't even begun to talk about the looming sort of ecological threat, that's facing us. I mean, you might say that it's not AI, it's not diseases and stuff like that that's going to radically alter human culture. It is actually the impending ecological disaster, right? I mean, obviously, I know there's wide-ranging sort of gamut of opinions on this view. But the hard evidence is there. Temperatures going up at rates that don't seem to be connected with a kind of underlying sort of wave pattern. It seems to be accelerating, and we're beginning to see whole swathes of land completely scorched. Previously kind of harvestable, rich soils and stuff, just wastelands now. And we're seeing mass migrations of certain mammals and humans, obviously millions of misplaced humans. And I know it doesn't look like it here in Britain because we seem to have been in the longest winter we can. But this itself may be something to do with these changing systems. I'm no expert on this stuff, but if we don't sort of start behaving ourselves, we're fucked. And it's kind of, and in some sense, for me, actually, the ecological argument is kind of neither here nor there. The sorts of behaviours that will continue to pollute and destroy the earth are just the sorts of behaviours that we should be avoiding anyway, for kind of philosophical and spiritual reasons, right? So but then again, we've got some kind of international ethical questions to ask about this stuff. Because look at India, right? They're still building coal mines. They're kind of still going through their industrial revolution, you might argue. And who are we to step in and say, oh well, look, the argument's there. If we keep on doing this stuff, we're going to kill ourselves, or at least significantly harm ourselves, and possibly even go backwards, technologically and stuff like that if we really fuck things up. But you can kind of see that there is this bit of head scratching to be done, saying, well, we've just we've done our thing. Why should we? We see ourselves as leading, shining examples of democracy and fucking global leadership. And look at us, aren't we amazing, right? And they try to be like us, and then we tell them off for it, right? So this is not nothing is easy, really, is it? And this certainly isn't. But how are we doing here? And am I on track? Is the question. So what am I really saying here? I'm saying that first of all, there's nothing new under the sun. So the issues that we face today are the same as the issues that humans have been facing for thousands of years, right? I think probably the most radical thing to happen to us is the agricultural revolution. We've talked about that elsewhere. It's the deep change in lifestyle from nomadism to agriculture, and settled communities. It's just such a radical change. Animals don't do this kind of shit. It's like, pigeons don't just sort of suddenly stop flying. So, well, let's just walk everywhere from now. Fish don't suddenly decide that they're not going to swim around. They're going to shuffle around. Well, I suppose we got amphibians because of this, didn't we, in the long run? But what I'm saying, it's like, species of animals. There's a page in the animal encyclopedia that says they do this, this, and this. Here are their habitats, and they keep doing it. We seem to have this. We seem to be able to transcend instinct to some degree. I think it's. It was Nietzsche said it was kind of, you tend not to see madness in so much in individuals as you do in groups. It's our collective action that's is more mad than singular action. So can we really change? I suppose that's the question. You know, are all of these various flavours of humanity, different cultures, nations, and so on, are they just like different flavours of ice cream? Are they inevitable? Is there real, authentic, substantial, kind of self-determining strategic characteristics that can be really say, well, that's English, that's notably English, or are we just, as Chomsky does with linguistics, just saying, no, there's a universal grammar. We're all subject to the same sorts of internalizations and representations, characterizations of the world and ourselves, which is ultimately what the whole sort of game seems to be for homeostatic living creatures, right? Is giving ourselves an inner representation that allows us to function within this social and spatial realm, right? So, yeah, I think there's quite a lot going on with this talk. But I am curious because I'm curious to understand what we could be if it were possible to kind of not completely dismiss, but just to observe and say, look, we love our traditions, we love our festivals and hog roasts and Christmas and so on and so forth, and we should take it sort of seriously, but not literally, right? And just always be aware and reserve a portion of ourselves that is free and can see a bit more clearly what's going on. This might be a bit like McGilchrist's left and right side hemisphere distinction. You've got the hope I get this the right way around. I'm pretty sure I will. You've got the left side that's a bit more sort of visceral, tactical, cares about what's going on now, and the right side, which is a bit more sort of parental, strategic, has a more holistic view of the situation. And one of the things McGilchrist is saying is that we're kind of left side focused at the moment, and it's causing a lot of neurosis because we're obsessed with efficiency, self-advancement, cult of the individual, and I mean, again, I might say, well, 'twas ever thus. A lot of us in sort of Britain and America have sort of Anglo-Saxon sort of warrior descent. It was all about the heroic sort of warrior king. And thus we created this sort of lineage of kind of individual glory sort of glory hunting almost. And so really some of our behaviours, this kind of mad, rabid capitalism seems just almost inevitable for a kind of warlike people. And so herein lies my point. So let's celebrate our wars and victories and histories and traditions and so on and so forth, but let's not be dictated by them. Let's not be defined by them, right? Let's see them as kind of symbols of a hard-fought and bitter history. But let's not be defined by those battles. Let's salute them, and let's empathise and sort of herald the bravery and sacrifice and so on and so forth. But let's not kind of be lulled into a kind of barbarian sort of stupor, and these cycles of revenge, which are ultimately, sort of generally what perpetuate most of the harms. Anyway, so I think I'm going to draw this to a close now. I think this total sort of 40 minutes of this. So I hope there's some useful stuff in there. But like I say, I think there's some further avenues for exploration here. Thank you. Bye.